I want to welcome our next speaker. Ricardo Mendez is a technical director at Samsung Next, and something that I'm very passionate about is a strong advocate of open source and privacy technologies. So he's leading the technical efforts for Samsung's investment arm in Europe, and he's actively looking into decentralization, privacy, and blockchain. So a lot of the very hot topics that thankfully also in Cluj have a lot of companies and startups pursuing. And the topic that he's going to cover is something that we've seen being very current also with the last Apple keynote, that they're doing more and more of that. And he's going to talk about identity, privacy, and how that's all coming together at the edge. Please give a warm round of applause to him.
Well, this is absolutely not an intimidating stage. Hi, everyone. So as he mentioned, my name is Ricardo Mendez, and I'm the technical director for Europe at Samsung Next. And Samsung Next, we do basically technology investments on software innovation. That's not what I'm here to talk about, but if you want to talk about it and you're building something cool, just grab me during the conference. What I am here to talk about is identity, privacy, and the edge. So let's get this going because we have a lot of ground to cover. And the clicker doesn't work. Different clicker? Oh, there we go. So I have a few goals for this talk. The first one is to get a clicker to work. Okay, do we have a different one? It's not moving forward. Nope. Nope. Oh, there we go. So first one is to give you a small taxonomy of concepts that I think and categories that I think are useful when talking about identity. The second one is to still figure this thing out. Thank you. Perfect. The second is walk you through what a layered conceptual model for identity could look like. Still not. Yes, then we're going to talk about the potential privacy implications for how we go about implementing things. And hopefully I'm going to try and convince you that the closer to the edge that we process things, the better it is for users, but that the edge does not necessarily guarantee privacy. Now, before we get too deeply into the weeds, let me make a big disclaimer here. This thing is both a work in progress and a collaborative effort. There's a whole bunch of us involved, both from Samsung Next and without, including a few of us who just happened to meet at the Internet Identity Workshop. I'm making this disclaimer early to not just to give credit to these people, but also to give you the idea that this is an ongoing topic. There is no master class. This is just an attempt to spark a conversation. Now, let's start with some definitions. Basically, identity is everything that defines you. It's how you identify yourself, not just to yourself, but to others. It is how you identify yourself to sites. It is what emerges from the sum total of everything you do. It is at the core of your life. And digital identity is what emerges from the aggregate of everything that you do online. Now, this is, of course, very general, but we separate identity into two major categories: facts and characteristics. Now, facts are straightforward enough. They're basically the specific, usually atomic details that we know about an individual. This will usually fall under personally identifying information, things like my name or username password keepers, an email address, passport numbers. And they're usually involved on authentication and verification. Now, I think there are two major types of facts. We have self-asserted facts, which are facts that you don't need any external support for instance, like a mailing address or username and password, or my phone number. If I give you my phone number, you can just trust me or trivially verify it. And when a fact is self-asserted, we call it identifiers. On the other hand, we can have facts that are externally validated. Your legal name, for instance, your driver's license, your passport. All this type of facts that are externally validated have some trust system associated with them. And if a fact has a trust system associated with them, then we call them credentials. Now, of course, a fact can fall into either category depending on use. For instance, Amazon trusts that I give them the right address to my apartment because if I don't, well, I don't get my packages, right? You trust that my name is Ricardo because if it's not, what do you have to lose? On the other hand, a bank would trust neither of those facts unless they can consider them credentials, because their entire business would suffer if they take as a credential something that they can't substantiate. However, while my name is Ricardo, that is not who I am. The who I am part of my identity is a lot less structured and a lot more mercurial. And these are all characteristics that emerge from my behavior. A lens on those characteristics is, for instance, the technologies working on investments who also write stocks combining movies and tech. Another lens on that is the anime fan with an eclectic music taste that ranges from prog rock to synthwave. And yet another lens of that is the extremely private individual who's made incredibly uncomfortable by even stating those characteristics to an audience. Now, characteristics, unlike facts, tend not to be set in stone. They can vary through the years and can have value even divorced from identifiers. If you know, for instance, that I have an interest in anime and you know in which direction that skews, well, you need to know a lot more to sell me the right t-shirt, right? Whereas facts are usually related to authentication, then characteristics tend to be more related to behavioral patterns and monetization. And when I talk about identity in general, in the abstract, you can assume that I'm talking about characteristics. Now, I understand that you're all builders, so this is probably still very general. So let's drill down a bit and talk about what a conceptual model for identity could look like. I expect everyone's familiar with the open systems interconnection model, but if not, let me give you a quick overview. It's basically a conceptual model of what a telecommunications system can look like as a series of layers. There are basically some very simple assumptions that every layer supports the layer above it, is served or supported by the layer below it, and communicates or exchanges data with layers at the same level. Now, this is a really great model for figuring out if you're building a new piece in the communication systems, like where does it fit? Like, how do I talk about this? And I've seen a few for identity, but a few of us took a stab at it and came up with one that we feel is more general. And again, oops, we're missing the footnotes, but basically, I want to make one thing clear again. This is not a standard by any means. This is just something that a few of us came up with mucking about concepts for a few hours. So here at the bottom that we can barely read is basically storage. And the storage layer is all raw data. This is probably going to be characteristics that we're recording or just raw facts. Now, because we need to have this data stored somewhere. And the next layer, we have the validation, or what trust system is underpinning this particular identity. As we mentioned, I can give you my name, but you might need a validation system associated with this if we're doing it because we're opening a bank account. In some cases, actually, this trust system is implicit. Again, if I give you my phone number, you can verify it by calling me. And in other cases, it is kind of built in to who you're communicating. If you have username and password keepers, if I give you a username and password, well, the site itself is the trust system because they have the hopefully salted and hashed identifier. Whereas in the other extreme, it depends on a completely external identity like a government validating your passport. Now, on top of those, we have references. And this is an interesting one because I myself tended to consider foo@bar.com, for instance, as the basic identity. But as somebody else pointed out, foo@bar.com and did foo-bar can be different references that reference the same identity. The underlying data and trust system can remain the same, while the reference layer can change. Now, I'll be happy to go about the rest of these offline. We unfortunately don't have nearly enough time. You will notice as we discussed it that the further up that we get on those things, probably the fussier the definitions get. And this is because as an industry, we're still figuring things out. Identity is a relatively recent topic, at least on this level of detail. But even though we expect this to change, we built it because we needed to have a common vocabulary when discussing systems and where they fit. Vocabulary helps you communicate, and communication is fundamental for getting things right. And we really need to get this right, because identity and how we architecture systems are going to have a significant impact on privacy. There's currently a mad scramble by gigantic gargantuan Goliaths to redefine privacy as, we're going to take all your data and just not sell it directly, right? Under this, and I know I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what he said. And under this definition of privacy, you're going to have privacy because it's only them watching your every move, right? It's not like that other blue behemoth who actually took that data and handed it out to somebody else. Whereas on the other side of this, we have the blue behemoth, who's basically saying that they're trying to pivot into a social network, and the argument is you're going to be private because everything will be encrypted. So under this definition, then you're going to be private because they don't have direct access to your logs or conversations. Well, give me a second here. Quite frankly, this is all bollocks. We're going to take all your data and not share it with anyone is what an acquaintance of mine calls pinky swear privacy. Now, pinky swear privacy can kind of work in some cases, but it requires trust. And for pinky swear privacy to work for you, you need to trust that they're actually going to hold up their pinky swear promise of not being evil, that they will properly implement controls so that no employees can abuse the power that they have with all this access that they get to your data, and that they are infallible engineers whose data will never leak. Unlike, say, people who keep passwords in clear text for their enterprise customers for over 14 years. So if that is the case, if you trust all these things, then that's fine, I guess. I mean, pinky swear privacy can work for you. And on the other hand, with Facebook's promises about how you're going to have privacy because everything is going to be processed on device and encrypted, well, I wouldn't really trust that until they're no longer an ad network, because edge processing can be privacy enhancing, but it is not privacy guaranteeing. Let me give you just 5 data points as an example. Suppose that you are processing all my data on edge. You don't have any access to the raw information. And yet you know that I'm usually online in a specific time zone, which specific IP addresses my connections come from, that I got served ads that skew towards movies and anime, that I click on ads about cat food every, say, 3 to 4 weeks, and that I never click on ads about nearby KFCs. I mean, with just 5 data points, we can see how a profile for somebody is emerging, even if we don't have the raw logs to what they're directly talking about. So this is to drive home the fact that you don't even need to know somebody identity facts if you have absolute access to all the characteristics that got uploaded so that you could serve them ads. And unfortunately, this is something for what I think we need technological solutions. And I can barely see in there, but if there are any lawyers in the audience, I can imagine them going like bloody engineers and everything is a technology solution. But frankly, I don't think this is something that we're going to be able to legislate or regulate our way out of. We already have regulation. We even use it, and it has had zero effect as a deterrent. On April 24th, Facebook announced that they expected to be fined by the FTC between $3 and $5 billion for privacy invasions. This had less than zero effect. In fact, their stock value shot up, increasing their market capitalization by over $40 billion after the announcement. I mean, they might as well have announced that the FTC had given them a license for privacy invasion. So we can add regulation and fines to the list of things that are not going to get us out of this mess. So keep this in mind if you're working on identity. Regulations and fines are not going to help us. People won't leave these services because of scandals or screw-ups, or they would have done it already. And more importantly, people won't switch just because you think your solution is more ethical. We already have a bunch of those, and most people aren't using them. Instead, if you want people to switch, you need to give them a good reason. You need to enable them to do something that they couldn't do before, enable some new interaction that they're not getting out of what they're doing now. And this is because identity is sticky. This stickiness manifests in the fear of losing their contacts, their friends, the small trickle of updates about who's dating whom and how the grandkids are doing. But there's also a fear of impermanence. People fear that if they leave the system, then all the data that has accumulated in there will go away. And this is the point that Jaron Lanier makes on his book, Who Owns the Future? That he's not only concerned that the services are privacy invaders which use your daily activities as their raw material, but also the fact that if, say, Facebook went into decline, then billions of people would lose access to all the online life that they have built. His solution is instead that government must come to be the place where the most basic online identity will be grounded in the long term. Now, this is a good book. I can really recommend it, even if I don't always agree with Lanier, but this is my point where I vehemently disagree. For your root identity for your main online identity to be rooted with anybody else for the users themselves will always make them subordinate to whomever controls this root. This might be inevitable right now in some cases because, or at least unavoidable, because there are some institutions that just expect you to have a data, your identity rooted in the government. But that is not the case for online identity. I firmly believe that online identity must be in control of the users. It must be self-sovereign. Now, self-sovereign identity is a topic in and of itself. We unfortunately don't have enough time to go into that, but I would really recommend that you read Christopher Allen's The Path to Self-Sovereign Identity, where he outlines a basic set of principles that are necessary not only for enabling trust on an identity provider, but also to preserve a user's privacy. And the reason why I do this is not just because I think that actually his sovereign identity principles are moral necessity. Earlier I mentioned that I think that for people to switch away, you're going to need to enable some new interaction. And self-sovereign identity, I think, is a lot more likely to enable new interactions just because as an industry we have barely started tinkering with it. Now, you'll see as you go through it that a lot of his principles boil down to users having a say on what happens and when. This, to me, means that we need to move data closer to the edge. If it's not directly on the user's device, then it needs to be somewhere that the user is the only one that has access to the key. But as we do this, we need to start looking at the solutions, at our architectures, with a lot more humanistic focus. Because usually we limit the definition of edge to how close to a data emission we process the event. But this needs to be a lot more than that, because when we're talking about this, we need to think not only about where we process the data, but who controls it and its output. If your data is being processed on device, but you have no control over what ad profile gets uploaded, then you're not really in control of the data. And we need to keep in mind that when we talk about this, we're not just talking about edge devices. We're talking about people. And if we want to empower them, hell, if we want to empower ourselves, then we need to architecture our systems so that they give the users more control. This is what I think we should be building towards. So if you agree, let's talk. Thank you.